Picture this. You're one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley. Your net worth exceeds $2 billion. You've built an empire from nothing, conquered markets that others said were impossible, and your name appears on Forbes lists year after year. You have private jets, mansions in 3 countries, and the ability to make phone calls that can change entire industries with a single conversation. But on this particular Tuesday evening in September, as you're racing through the rain-soaked streets of San Francisco in your Bentley, none of that matters. Your 8-year-old son is unconscious in the back seat, his small body burning with fever, and every red light feels like an eternity. You've called ahead to the most expensive private hospital in the city, but traffic has other plans. The closest emergency room is St. Mary's General Hospital, a place you've never set foot in, a place where your money, your influence, your carefully cultivated reputation mean absolutely nothing. You carry your child through those automatic doors, his weight feeling both impossibly light and devastatingly heavy in your arms. The fluorescent lights are harsh, the smell of antiseptic fills your nostrils, and for the first time in decades, you are completely, utterly powerless. You place him on the gurney, watch as nurses in scrubs take over, their hands moving with practiced efficiency while you stand there, a billionaire reduced to just another terrified parent. The nurse looks up at you with kind but tired eyes and says the words that will change everything. Dr. Martinez will be right with you. That name hits you like a physical blow. Martinez. It couldn't be. Not here. Not now. Not after 15 years of carefully constructed distance from the past you've spent your entire adult life trying to forget. You tell yourself it's impossible, that there are thousands of doctors named Martinez, that the universe couldn't be cruel enough to orchestrate this moment. But as those examination room doors swing open, as the figure in the white coat turns around, you realize that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it comes back wearing scrubs and carrying the power to save the person you love most in this world. The face that looks back at you is older, more weathered by years of sleepless nights and difficult decisions, but those eyes that once looked at you with infinite trust and love, are unmistakable. Standing before you, holding your son's life in her hands, is the woman whose heart you shattered 15 years ago when you chose your empire over everything else that mattered. What happens next will force a reckoning 15 years in the making. Because sometimes, when we think we've left our past behind, life has a way of bringing it back in the most unexpected, most necessary way possible. Before we start this incredible story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Now, let's get into this remarkable tale that will show you how sometimes the biggest fortunes can't buy what matters most. David Chen's story begins long before that desperate night at St. Mary's Hospital. At 45 years old, he had become everything he'd ever dreamed of and more. His company, Chen Innovations, had revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure, making him one of the youngest billionaires in tech history. But success, as David would learn, always comes with a price that isn't visible on any balance sheet. 3 years earlier, David had faced the only battle his money couldn't win. His wife Sarah, a gentle woman who had loved him despite his workaholic tendencies, had lost her fight with breast cancer. In those final months, as he watched her fade away in their Marin County mansion, David made a promise that would define the rest of his life. He would be the father to their son Tommy that he had never quite managed to be a husband to Sarah. Tommy Chen was 8 years old, with his mother's soft brown eyes and his father's determination. Since Sarah's death, David had restructured his entire life around his son. Board meetings were scheduled around soccer practices. Business trips were shortened to make it home for bedtime stories. For the first time in his adult life, David Chen had found something more important than the endless pursuit of more. On that September evening, father and son were doing what had become their Tuesday tradition, playing soccer in the backyard of their 20,000-square-foot home. The grounds were immaculate, maintained by a team of gardeners, but David insisted on this one patch of grass where he and Tommy could just be themselves. No business calls, no assistants hovering with urgent messages, just a father teaching his son how to bend a soccer ball around imaginary defenders. Tommy was laughing, his small legs pumping as he chased the ball, when suddenly he stopped. His face went pale, and he doubled over, clutching his stomach. David initially thought it was just a cramp from running, but when Tommy collapsed to his knees and began vomiting, Panic set in like nothing David had ever experienced. In the business world, David Chen was known for his calm under pressure, his ability to make million-dollar decisions in seconds. But watching his son writhe in pain on that perfectly manicured grass, he felt completely helpless. Tommy's fever spiked rapidly, his small body shaking with chills one moment and burning up the next. By the time David had him in the Bentley, Tommy had lost consciousness. As David raced through the San Francisco streets, his mind was a chaos of fear and desperate calculations. He had the best doctors in the world on speed dial, private medical facilities that would have opened their doors at any hour for the Chen family. But Tommy needed help now, and St. Mary's General Hospital was the closest emergency room. It was a place David had never been, in a part of the city his usual routes avoided entirely. St. Mary's served a different population than the exclusive medical centers David was accustomed to. This was where teachers and bus drivers brought their children, where families worried about insurance copays and waited in plastic chairs under harsh fluorescent lighting. As David carried Tommy through those doors, he entered a world where his name meant nothing, where his ability to write checks couldn't expedite care, where he was just another desperate parent begging someone to save his child. The triage nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, took one look at Tommy and immediately called for a gurney. David found himself pushed to the side as medical professionals took over, their movements efficient and purposeful. For a man accustomed to being in control of every situation, the helplessness was overwhelming. "We need to get him to examination room 3, the nurse called out. "Dr. Martinez is on her way." In that moment, as David followed the gurney down the hospital corridor, he had no idea that his carefully constructed new life was about to collide with the past he had spent 15 years trying to forget. The name Martinez echoed in his mind, stirring memories he had buried so deep he had almost convinced himself they belonged to someone else. But the human heart has a way of remembering what the mind tries to forget, and as those examination room doors prepared to open, David Chen was about to face the consequences of choices he had made when he was young, ambitious, and foolish enough to believe that success could fill any void. Dr. Elena Martinez had been at St. Mary's Hospital for 7 years, but her reputation had preceded her arrival by decades. At 42, she was considered one of the finest pediatric surgeons on the West Coast, known not just for her technical skill but for her extraordinary ability to connect with children and their families during their most frightening moments. Her colleagues often joked that she could calm a screaming child with just her voice, but there was nothing amusing about the dedication that had made such a skill necessary. Elena had chosen St. Mary's deliberately, turning down lucrative offers from private hospitals and prestigious medical centers. This hospital served families who couldn't afford the luxury of choice, children whose lives hung in the balance while their parents counted dollars and prayed their insurance would cover another day of treatment. For Elena, this wasn't just a career, it was a calling that had grown from seeds planted in her own childhood. As she hurried toward examination room 3 that evening, Elena's mind was focused entirely on the patient waiting for her. The preliminary reports suggested acute appendicitis in an 8-year-old male, a serious but treatable condition if caught in time. She had performed hundreds of such procedures, guided countless families through this exact crisis. There was no reason to expect this case would be any different from the others. She pushed open the examination room door, her eyes immediately going to the small figure on the bed, then looking up to address the parent who would need reassurance and clear information about what came next. The face that met her gaze made her forget every word of comfort she had planned to offer. David Chen. After 15 years, 3 months and 12 days, not that she had been counting, there he was. Older, with lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, his dark hair showing the first hints of silver at the temples. He wore an expensive suit that was now wrinkled and stained with grass from the soccer field, his usual composed demeanor shattered by the fear every parent knows when their child is in danger. For a moment that felt like an eternity, they simply stared at each other across the small examination room. The weight of their shared history hung in the air like smoke, 15 years of silence stretching between them while Tommy Chen lay unconscious on the hospital bed, his small chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Elena's training kicked in first. Whatever personal history existed between her and this man, her patient came first. It had always been that way for her. The children always came first. She moved to Tommy's side, her hands gentle as she began her examination, her voice professional and calm as she spoke to David. "When did the symptoms begin?" she asked, not looking at him, her focus entirely on the child who needed her expertise. David's voice was rough when he answered, the fear for his son overriding any awkwardness about their unexpected reunion. "About an hour ago. He was playing soccer, then suddenly doubled over in pain. The fever came on fast, and he lost consciousness in the car." As Elena worked, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, she couldn't help but notice the small details that spoke of David's transformation. The way he hovered near the bed, his eyes never leaving his son's face. The gentle way he brushed the boy's hair back from his forehead. The raw fear in his voice when he spoke. This was not the ambitious young man she had once known, the one who had chosen his startup over their shared dreams. But to understand the magnitude of this moment, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to the University of California at Berkeley, where two ambitious young people met in the most ordinary way and fell in love with an intensity that would shape both their lives forever. It was the fall of 2008, and David Chen was a senior computer science major with a head full of dreams about changing the world through technology. He was brilliant, driven, and absolutely certain that success was just a matter of working harder than everyone else. He spent his days in computer labs and his nights coding projects that his professors said were graduate-level work. Elena Rodriguez was a pre-med student with her own dreams of changing the world, but hers involved healing rather than disrupting. She was the daughter of immigrants, the first in her family to attend college, carrying the weight of her parents' sacrifices and her own determination to make their struggles worthwhile. She studied with the intensity of someone who knew that failure wasn't just personal disappointment, it was letting down everyone who had believed in her. They met in the most mundane way possible, fighting over the last copy of a textbook in the library. The organic chemistry book that Elena needed for her MCAT preparation was the same one David needed for a biotech elective he was taking. What started as a territorial dispute over study materials became a study partnership, and what began as academic collaboration slowly transformed into something neither of them had expected. David was fascinated by Elena's dedication to healing, her genuine desire to help children who couldn't help themselves. Elena was drawn to David's vision of using technology to solve problems, his belief that innovation could make the world a better place. They spent hours in coffee shops, not just studying but dreaming about the future they would build together. By spring of their senior year, they were inseparable. David would wait for Elena outside her organic chemistry lab, and she would bring him coffee during his all-night coding sessions. They talked about everything, their fears, their ambitions, the families they hoped to build, the difference they wanted to make in the world. The proposal came during finals week of their senior year, in the same library where they had first met. David had spent weeks planning something elaborate, but in the end, it happened spontaneously. Elena was stressed about her MCAT scores, worried that she wouldn't get into medical school, and David couldn't bear to see her doubt herself. "Elena," he said, kneeling beside her chair in the quiet study section, "whatever happens with medical school, whatever happens with my startup ideas, I want us to face it together. Will you marry me?" The ring was simple. David was still a college student, after all, but Elena's tears were joyful as she said yes. They had their whole lives ahead of them, and they were going to change the world together. But life, as it often does, had different plans. David's senior project caught the attention of a venture capital firm. What had started as a class assignment became the foundation for a cloud computing company that investors were calling revolutionary. Suddenly, David found himself with the opportunity to drop out of school, move to Silicon Valley, and build something that could change how the entire world used technology. Elena was accepted to UCSF Medical School, one of the most prestigious programs in the country. Her dream of becoming a pediatric surgeon was within reach, but medical school was a 4-year commitment, followed by residency and fellowship. There would be no flexibility, no possibility of following David to Silicon Valley and still pursuing her career. 4 months, they tried to make it work. David was building his company, working 18-hour days, flying between San Francisco and Los Angeles for meetings with investors. Elena was drowning in coursework, spending her days in anatomy labs and her nights studying for exams that would determine her entire future. The strain began to show in small ways first. Missed phone calls that turned into missed dates. Conversations that became arguments about time and priorities. The dreams they had shared began to feel like luxuries they couldn't afford while they were both fighting to survive in their respective worlds. The end came not with a dramatic fight, but with a quiet conversation in Elena's small apartment near the UCSF campus. David had driven down from Silicon Valley, exhausted from a week of investor meetings, and Elena had just finished a particularly brutal exam. They sat on her couch, both too tired for pretense, and finally said what they had been avoiding for months. "I can't do this anymore," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, David, but I feel like I'm losing myself trying to fit into the spaces between your meetings." David's response revealed how much the pressure had changed him. "You knew this was important to me. You knew what I was trying to build. If you loved me, you would find a way to make it work." The words hung in the air between them, and Elena knew in that moment that the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had supported her dreams as fiercely as his own, was gone. In his place was someone who saw her career as an obstacle to his success, her ambitions as secondary to his own. She took off the engagement ring and placed it on the coffee table between them. "I hope you build everything you're dreaming of, David. I really do. But I won't sacrifice who I am to be part of it." David left that night, and they never spoke again. He threw himself into his company with the desperation of someone trying to prove that he had made the right choice. Elena buried herself in her studies, using her heartbreak as fuel for the dedication that would make her one of the finest doctors of her generation. Now, 15 years later, they faced each other across a hospital bed where David's son lay unconscious, and all those buried feelings rose to the surface like a tide that could no longer be held back. Elena's examination of Tommy Chen was thorough and methodical, but her experienced hands immediately confirmed what she had suspected from the preliminary reports. The child's symptoms pointed to acute appendicitis, but there were complications that made this case more serious than a routine appendectomy. His white blood cell count is elevated, and there's significant tenderness in the lower right quadrant, she explained to David, her voice maintaining professional distance despite the personal maelstrom swirling beneath the surface. "The appendix appears to have ruptured, which means we're dealing with potential peritonitis. He needs surgery immediately." David's face went pale. In the business world, he was accustomed to technical explanations, complex problems with multiple variables. But medical terminology was a foreign language when it concerned his son's life. "What does that mean? Is he going to be okay?" Elena's training had taught her to be honest with parents while providing reassurance when possible. "Ruptured appendix is serious, but it's something we see regularly. The key is acting quickly to prevent infection from spreading. I'll need to perform emergency surgery to remove the appendix and clean the abdominal cavity." The irony of the situation was not lost on either of them. David, who had spent his career building systems and solutions, was completely dependent on Elena's expertise. The woman whose heart he had broken now held his son's life in her hands, and there was nothing his billions could do to change that equation. As Elena prepared for surgery, she found herself grappling with emotions she had thought were long buried. Professional ethics demanded that she treat every patient with the same level of care regardless of personal feelings, but this was David's child. The man who had taught her that love could be conditional, that dreams could be ranked in order of importance, that someone could simply choose to stop fighting for a relationship when it became inconvenient. But looking at Tommy, unconscious and vulnerable on the hospital bed, Elena saw only a child who needed her help. Whatever anger she still carried toward David, it had no place in the operating room. This 8-year-old boy deserved the very best of her skill and experience, and she would give him nothing less. "I need you to sign the surgical consent forms," she told David, handing him a clipboard. "There are always risks with any surgery, but this is a procedure I've performed hundreds of times. Tommy is young and healthy otherwise, which works in his favor." David's hand shook slightly as he signed the papers. "Elena, I need you to know Don't," she interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "Whatever you need to say, it can wait. Right now, the only thing that matters is your son." As Tommy was wheeled into the operating room, David found himself alone in the surgical waiting area, surrounded by other families facing their own medical crises. For the first time in years, he was just another person waiting for news, his wealth and status meaningless in this fluorescent-lit room with its uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. He tried to distract himself with his phone, checking emails and stock prices, but the numbers on the screen seemed insignificant compared to the life-and-death surgery happening behind those closed doors. His mind kept returning to Elena. How composed she had been, how her hands had moved with such confidence as she examined Tommy. In the quiet of the waiting room, David was forced to confront truths he had been avoiding for 15 years. Elena had become everything she had dreamed of being. The shy pre-med student he had once known was now a renowned surgeon, someone who saved children's lives as naturally as breathing. She had built a career of meaning and purpose while he had built an empire of servers and stock options. Through the large windows of the waiting room, David could see the city lights of San Francisco, the same view he commanded from his corner office in the financial district. From up there, in his glass tower, the problems of ordinary people seemed abstract, manageable through charitable donations and tax-deductible contributions. But sitting in this hospital, he was just another frightened parent, and all his achievements felt hollow. Hours passed with no word from the operating room. David's assistant called twice, trying to brief him on urgent matters that suddenly seemed trivial. A merger that could add millions to his company's value. A potential acquisition that would expand their European operations. None of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was whether Elena could save his son. As the night wore on, other families came and went. A mother clutching her daughter's stuffed animal. An elderly man waiting for news about his wife's heart surgery. A young couple holding hands and praying silently. David began to understand something he had never grasped before. His money had insulated him from the common human experience of vulnerability, but it had also isolated him from the profound connections that made life meaningful. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elena emerged from the surgical wing. She was still wearing her scrubs, her surgical cap pushed back, revealing hair that was slightly damp with perspiration. Her expression was tired but professionally composed as she approached David. "The surgery went well," she said without preamble. "We removed the appendix and cleaned out the infection. Tommy is going to be fine, but he'll need to stay in the hospital for a few days while we monitor his recovery and make sure there are no complications." The relief that washed over David was so intense he had to sit down. His son was safe. Elena had saved him. All the money in the world couldn't have bought what this woman had just given him through her skill and dedication. "Can I see him?" David asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "He's in recovery now, still unconscious from the anesthesia. You can sit with him, but he probably won't wake up for another hour or two." Elena paused, studying David's face. "He's a brave kid. He's going to be just fine." As David followed Elena down the corridor toward the recovery room, he realized that this night had changed everything. Not just because of Tommy's surgery, but because he had been forced to confront the man he had become and the choices that had brought him to this moment. Tommy Chin looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that monitored his vital signs with soft beeps and glowing numbers. David pulled a chair close to his son's bedside and took the child's hand in his own, careful not to disturb the four-line that delivered fluids and antibiotics. Elena checked Tommy's chart and monitors with practiced efficiency, but David noticed how her expression softened when she looked at his son. There was something in her eyes, a tenderness that went beyond professional care. It was the same look she used to get when they volunteered at the children's clinic during their college years, when she would sit with sick kids and make them laugh despite their pain. "He reminds me of you at that age," Elena said quietly, surprising David with the personal observation. "In the old photos you showed me. The same stubborn chin." It was the first reference either of them had made to their shared past, and it hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. "Elena," David began, his voice barely audible, "I know this isn't the time or place, but I need you to know how sorry I am. About everything. About how it ended between us." Elena continued checking Tommy's monitors, but David could see the tension in her shoulders. "David, please. Not here. Not now." "When, then?" David asked. It's been 15 years. When is the right time to say that I was wrong? That I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. Elena finally looked at him directly, and David saw something in her eyes that made his heart ache. Not anger, but a deep sadness that seemed to have settled there long ago. You didn't let me go, David. You chose to leave. There's a difference. The conversation was interrupted by Tommy stirring in his bed. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually taking in his surroundings. He looked confused and frightened until his gaze found his father's face. Dad, where are we? My stomach hurts. David squeezed his son's hand gently. We're in the hospital, buddy. You were sick, but you're going to be okay now. This is Dr. Martinez. She's the one who made you better. Tommy turned his attention to Elena, studying her with the direct curiosity of childhood. Are you really a doctor? You look too young to be a doctor. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile David had seen from her all night. I get that a lot. I've been a doctor for a long time, though. Long enough to know that brave kids like you always get better fast. Did you have to cut me open? Tommy asked with the morbid fascination typical of 8-year-olds. Just a little bit, Elena said seriously. But I was very careful, and now the part that was making you sick is gone. You have some small cuts that need to heal, but in a few days you'll be back to playing soccer with your dad. Tommy considered this information solemnly. My mom died in a hospital, he said matter-of-factly. But she said hospitals are where people go to get better, not worse. She said the doctors and nurses are like angels who help people. The simple statement hit both adults like a physical blow. David felt tears threaten as he remembered Sarah's final days, how she had tried to prepare Tommy for losing her while still maintaining his faith in healing and hope. Elena's professional composure wavered for just a moment. Your mom sounds like she was very wise, she said softly. And very brave. She was, Tommy agreed. Dad cries sometimes when he thinks I'm not looking, but I think she's still watching out for us. Maybe she sent you to help me tonight. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. Sometimes children see connections that adults miss, understand truths that experience has taught us to question. In that moment, with Tommy's innocent observation hanging in the air, both David and Elena felt the presence of something larger than their own personal history. Elena excused herself to check on other patients, leaving David alone with his son. But Tommy, despite his ordeal, was alert and curious about everything that had happened. Dad, do you know Dr. Martinez from before? He asked with the intuitive perception that children often possess. David was surprised by the question. What makes you ask that? The way you looked at each other. Like when you see old friends but you're not sure if you're still friends or not. The accuracy of his son's observation was unsettling. Dr. Martinez and I knew each other a long time ago, before you were born. Before I met your mom. Tommy processed this information with 8-year-old logic. Were you friends? We were, more than friends. We were going to get married. What happened? David struggled with how to explain adult complexities to a child. Sometimes people want different things, and they can't figure out how to want the same things together. Tommy frowned, as if this concept made no sense to him. But if you loved each other, why didn't you just choose the same things? It was a question David had been asking himself for 15 years, and he still didn't have a good answer. Around 3 a.m, when Tommy had fallen back asleep and the hospital had settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm, David found Elena in the break room. She was sitting at a small table with a cup of coffee, looking exhausted but still alert. The harsh fluorescent lighting couldn't diminish the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her, the same quality that had drawn him to her all those years ago. Thank you, he said simply, sitting across from her. For saving Tommy. For being so good with him. For everything. Elena nodded, not looking at him directly. He's a wonderful kid, David. Sarah did a beautiful job raising him. How did you know about Sarah? I kept track of you, sometimes. Not obsessively, but when your name appeared in the news. I knew you had gotten married, had a son. I was sorry to hear about her death. David was quiet for a long moment. I loved Sarah. She was a good woman, a good mother. But it was different from what we had. Different how? Safer. Less intense. I could love her without risking everything. Elena finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Do you know what I did after we broke up, David? I threw myself into medical school like a woman possessed. I studied 18 hours a day, graduated at the top of my class, got into the best residency program in the country. I told myself I was proving that I didn't need you, that I was better off without you. You were better off without me. Look what you've accomplished. Was I? Elena asked. I'm 42 years old, David. I've never been married. I don't have children. I pour all my maternal instincts into other people's kids because I was too afraid to risk having my own family after you showed me how easily love could be discarded. The words hung between them like an accusation and a confession all at once. I built walls so high around my heart that no one else could get in. I told myself it was about focus, about dedication to my career. But the truth is, you broke something in me that never quite healed right. David felt the weight of her words like a physical pain. Elena, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, she interrupted. I'm telling you because we're both different people now, and maybe it's time we both stopped carrying around the ghosts of who we used to be. Tommy's recovery over the next few days was remarkable, aided not just by Elena's surgical skill but by his own resilient spirit and his father's constant presence. David had cleared his schedule completely, something that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier, and spent every moment at his son's bedside. Elena checked on Tommy regularly, and each visit brought small moments of connection. She brought him books about surgery that explained medical procedures in kid-friendly terms. She answered his endless questions about how the human body worked. She even smuggled in a soccer ball that he could squeeze to exercise his hands while he recovered. Dr. Elena is really cool, Tommy told his father during one of Elena's visits. She knows everything about everything, and she's not boring like some grown-ups. David watched Elena's face light up at the compliment, and he saw glimpses of the young woman he had once known, the one who had dreamed of healing children, who had volunteered at free clinics not for resume building but because she genuinely cared about making the world better for kids who had fewer advantages than she did. On Tommy's last day in the hospital, as Elena was preparing his discharge papers, Tommy made an announcement that surprised both adults. I want to be a doctor when I grow up, he declared. Like Dr. Elena. I want to help kids feel better. Elena smiled at him with genuine warmth. That's a wonderful goal, Tommy. But you know what? There are lots of ways to help people feel better. Your dad helps people too, just in different ways. Tommy considered this seriously. Maybe Dad and I could help people together. Like a team. As they prepared to leave the hospital, David found himself reluctant to say goodbye to Elena. Not because of unresolved romantic feelings, but because she had become something unexpected over the past few days. A friend who understood both the man he had been and the father he was trying to become. Elena, he said as they stood in the hospital lobby, Tommy clutching his discharge papers and a balloon the nurses had given him. I want you to know that seeing you again, seeing who you've become, it's made me realize some things about my own life. What kind of things? That success isn't just about building something big. It's about building something meaningful. You save children's lives every day. That's success. Elena was quiet for a moment. We both found our own ways to make a difference, David. Maybe that's what was supposed to happen. Tommy, who had been listening to their conversation with the selective attention of childhood, suddenly spoke up. Can Dr. Elena come to my birthday party next month? I want to show her my soccer trophies. Both adults looked at him in surprise. It was such a simple request, but it carried the weight of possibility. I don't know if Dr. Elena has time for birthday parties, David said carefully. Elena knelt down to Tommy's level. You know what? I would love to see your soccer trophies. If your dad says it's okay, maybe I could stop by for a little while. Tommy's face lit up with joy, and David felt something shift in his chest, not the return of old romantic feelings, but something new and different. The possibility of friendship, of connection, of two people who had shared a past finding a way to share a future that honored both their history and their growth. 6 months later, David Chen stood in the same backyard where Tommy had collapsed, but this time he wasn't alone. Elena had become a regular presence in their lives, not as a romantic partner, but as something equally valuable, a trusted friend who understood the delicate balance between caring for others and caring for yourself. Tommy's birthday party had been the beginning of something none of them had expected. Elena had arrived with a medical textbook written for children and stayed for 3 hours, charmed by Tommy's friends and surprised by how naturally she fit into their world. She found herself laughing at David's attempts to manage a dozen 8-year-olds, and he found himself grateful for her help when one of the kids scraped his knee and needed the kind of calm, competent care that only a pediatric surgeon could provide. What developed between them wasn't romance. They were both too wise now, too aware of how much they had each grown and changed to try to recapture something from their youth. Instead, they built something more mature and perhaps more lasting, a friendship based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection for the remarkable child who had brought them back together. Elena began joining them for their Tuesday soccer games, sometimes bringing along stories from the hospital that made Tommy even more determined to become a doctor. David found himself asking her advice not about medical matters, but about life decisions, about balancing work and family, about raising a son who would grow up to be a man of both ambition and compassion. The transformation in David was gradual but unmistakable. His company continued to thrive, but he approached success differently now. He established a foundation focused on improving pediatric healthcare in underserved communities, with Elena serving as an advisor. He restructured his work schedule to ensure that Tommy's needs always came first, and he discovered that this balance actually made him a better leader, more focused and decisive during his working hours. Elena, too, found herself changing. Having David and Tommy in her life reminded her that healing could happen outside the operating room as well as within it. She began to lower some of the walls she had built around her heart, not for romance necessarily, but for the fuller kind of life that included deep friendships and chosen family. Tommy flourished in this environment, surrounded by adults who modeled different kinds of success and fulfillment. He continued to excel at soccer, but he also volunteered at the hospital during Elena's shifts, reading to younger patients and helping them feel less afraid. At 9 years old, he already understood something that had taken his father decades to learn, that the greatest achievements come from lifting others up, not from climbing higher yourself. On a particularly warm Saturday afternoon, as David pushed Tommy on the tire swing they had installed in their backyard, Elena sat on the porch steps grading medical student exams. It was a scene of domestic contentment that none of them had planned but all of them treasured. "You know what's funny?" Elena said, looking up from her papers as Tommy's laughter filled the air. "What's that?" David asked, still pushing the swing. "If someone had told me 15 years ago that this is where we'd end up, not together the way we planned, but together in this different way, I would never have believed them." David slowed the swing until Tommy came to a gentle stop. "Do you think we would have been happy if we had gotten married back then?" Elena considered the question seriously. "I think we would have tried to be. But I think we would have made each other smaller, somehow. We were so young, so sure we knew who we were and what we wanted. We needed to become ourselves separately before we could be friends." Tommy, who had been listening with the selective attention of childhood, suddenly piped up. "I think Mom sent Dr. Elena to us when I got sick. Not to be my new mom, but to be our family friend who takes care of people." His innocent observation silenced both adults. From the mouth of a 9-year-old came wisdom that neither of them had been able to articulate, that love comes in many forms, that families can be built from friendship as well as blood, and that sometimes the best gifts come disguised as crises. As the sun began to set over their backyard gathering, David realized that this moment, imperfect, unplanned, born from emergency and sustained by choice, was worth more than all the success he had accumulated in his business life. He had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in stock options or company valuations, but in the depth of connections we build with the people who matter most. Elena packed up her papers and prepared to leave for her evening rounds at the hospital. Tommy hugged her goodbye with the fierce affection of childhood, making her promise to come watch his soccer game on Thursday. David walked her to her car, both of them comfortable in the easy rhythm of friendship they had established. "Thank you," he said as she unlocked her car door. "For what this time?" she asked with a smile. "For saving Tommy that night. For forgiving me for being young and stupid. For showing me that some endings are actually beginnings." Elena paused with her hand on the car door. "You know what I realized, David? We didn't fail 15 years ago. We just weren't ready for what we thought we wanted. But we were exactly where we needed to be to become the people who could build this." She gestured toward the house, where Tommy was visible through the window, already in his pajamas and reading a book about the human heart that she had brought him. "This isn't the life either of us planned, but it's a good life. Maybe it's even better than what we originally dreamed." As Elena drove away and David returned to help Tommy get ready for bed, he reflected on the strange mathematics of human connection. Sometimes the relationships that matter most aren't the ones we chase or plan or force into existence. Sometimes they're the ones that grow quietly in the spaces between crisis and healing, between forgiveness and acceptance, between the people we used to be and the people we choose to become. That night, as David tucked Tommy into bed, his son asked the question that had become their bedtime ritual. "Dad, what was the best part of your day?" David thought about the question seriously, as he always did. "The best part was watching you and Elena laugh together when she was explaining how hearts work." "What about you, buddy?" Tommy considered this with 9-year-old gravity. "I think the best part was that we're all together, but we're all still ourselves too." Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. In fact, it was the wisest thing anyone had said all day. As David turned off the lights and headed to his own room, he paused at his bedroom window, which overlooked the backyard where this whole chapter of their lives had begun. The grass was still there, the goalposts Tommy had asked for on his last birthday. But everything else had changed in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. Sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, even when it's nothing like what we thought we wanted. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about romance at all, but about the deeper connections that form when people choose to show up for each other through crisis and healing, through forgiveness and growth, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life well lived. David Chen had learned that the most valuable investments aren't made in markets or startups, but in the people who become our chosen family. And Elena Martinez had discovered that the heart she thought was too damaged to love again was actually just waiting for the right kind of love. The kind that heals rather than hurts, that builds rather than demands, that sees us as we are and chooses to stay anyway. In the end, Tommy had been right all along. His mother had sent Elena to them that night in the hospital, not to reclaim the past, but to help them all build a future none of them could have imagined alone. And if you listen carefully on Tuesday evenings in that Marin County backyard, you can still hear the sound of a soccer ball being kicked between 3 people who learned that the best families aren't always the ones we're born into, but sometimes the ones we choose to create from the beautiful mess of second chances, forgiveness, and love that shows up exactly when we need it most. This story reminds us that life's most profound moments often come disguised as emergencies, and that the people who matter most sometimes return to our lives in ways we never expected. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the connections we nurture and the love we share with those who choose to walk alongside us through both crisis and celebration. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about love, family, and the unexpected ways life brings us exactly what we need. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that second chances are real, that forgiveness is possible, and that the best love stories aren't always about romance. Sometimes they're about the deeper connections that heal us and help us become who we were always meant to be. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever had someone from your past return to your life in an unexpected way? How did it change your perspective on forgiveness and second chances? We love reading your stories and experiences. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest investments we make are in the people who become our chosen family.